your oracle of the deplorables. And thanks for being with us. Joining me now, Nick Freitas, former House of Delegates member in Virginia, Republican, obviously. Nick, also former U.S. Senate candidate, former congressional candidate, lost both very, very close, razor-thin races, but also a Green Beret, knows a little bit about things that happened in Venezuela. We really wanted to get him on today, get his perspective. Nick Freitas also has his own podcast going. That's going gangbusters. Nick, great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Nick, always a pleasure. First, before we start, my best to you, your wife, your family, and a very happy new year and successful 2026, Nick.
No, thank you. You as well. You as well.
Nick, I want your perspective on the Venezuelan raid. Maduro now on his way to U.S. District Court in Brooklyn, captured by the American military in an unbelievably precise, successful, and bold move. Give us your thoughts. Break it down for us, Nick.
Well, I think with respect to the special ops raid that took place, which was largely conducted by Delta, but had many other military and intelligence elements participating, it's textbook. We're going to be studying this for decades. They're going to be looking at what all was done, how it was done, how it was executed, and I mean, just kudos all around. I could not be more proud of the units that performed this operation, from 160th to Delta and everyone else. It was incredible. I'm thrilled Maduro is gone. He was a socialist dictator. He tortured and abused the Venezuelan people along with Chavez before him. And so I'm thrilled he's gone. I think it's comical that at the same time New York City implants a socialist, we take one out, right? Maybe we should make this a common thing. Anytime you elect a socialist, we take one out. But by the same token, I've also voiced concerns about what happens next. As soon as Trump said we're going to run Venezuela, I was like, ooh, okay, there's a best case scenario here, and there is a worst case scenario here, and I want to make sure we do it right. And I think what makes my concern different from what I've seen from like the Bernie Sanders, the Ilhan Omars, the AOCs, is they're mad that a socialist dictator was taken out. They're just mad that Trump's in office and he got a win. I'm not having a good faith discussion with anyone on the left, because I don't believe they actually have good faith discussions. I believe everything for them is about consolidating power. But for those of us who genuinely admire the Trump administration, how we handle this next phase really is going to matter, and we need to get it right, because the raid was incredibly impressive, but it's only step one at this point. And if we do want to turn Venezuela into a strategic ally, if we do want to have positive ramifications among the rest of South America, Central America, the Caribbean, we really need to be careful on how we do this next phase.
Define what a successful next phase is in Nick Freitas' mind.
Sure. Well, one is we need to understand that we can't do a direct comparison between Iraq and Venezuela. It's two very, very different environments. We can certainly learn lessons from things that we did wrong in Iraq. One of the biggest problems that we made in Iraq going in initially was as soon as we had overthrown Saddam's regime, we essentially immediately engaged in what they called like de-Baathification. So it was this idea that all of the sizable portions of the military, sizable portions of the infrastructure, if you had been associated with Saddam Hussein, you were kicked out. And there's an understanding to this, because obviously you had people that had committed war crimes, but you had other people that were just part of the regime, because if you weren't part of the regime, you couldn't fill any position of importance. And so we need to distinguish between those two things. Obviously, if you have people that were going around torturing Venezuelans, you don't leave those people in place. But you literally have tens of thousands of people, young men specifically, who depend on their pay by serving in the Venezuelan military or with law enforcement. And if you just cut that down, or you say we're building from the ground up, what's going to end up happening is they're going to take their weapons, they're going to run, and they're going to sell their guns to the highest bidder. So if there's one lesson that we could learn from Iraq that we should apply to Venezuela, is that it's incredibly important to make sure that the security forces in place remain in place and loyal to whatever incoming government that we bring. And a big part of that is going to be based off of, can we keep the pay going? Which is why I think Donald Trump has placed emphasis on taking over the oil infrastructure in Venezuela, which the Venezuelan government has essentially given up on. They haven't built anything really new there since 1976. Daniel DiMartino, who's fled El Salvador in 2016, he can really talk about this from the perspective of both a Venezuelan and an economist. But it's important to understand that they have become overly dependent on the drug trade in order to finance their operations. And what that means is that's still going to be competing, right? The drugs and stuff like that, that's still going to be competing for soldiers, for guys with guns. And by going in and actually taking over the oil infrastructure, getting it pumping again, it's not only beneficial to the United States, it's also beneficial to the incoming government. So if we can, again, to the extent that we don't want a full occupation of the country, right? We do not want American forces being responsible for the overall management and security of Venezuela. Limited deployments, guys like 7th Special Forces Group, these are guys that regularly work in South America, in Latin America. They work by, through, and with the local population, by, through, and with the established military and law enforcement. These are the sort of advisors that we can have on the ground these guys are professionals. They go through an extensive amount of training. I was 1st Special Forces Group. We had Asia. 7th is responsible for Latin America. There's probably going to have to be some troop or law enforcement deployment in order to help protect oil infrastructure. But a successful phase is getting in there very quick, getting a new government established, probably based off of the previous election, which Maduro stole, and then making sure that we actually have unification within the anti-Maduro, anti-Chavez factions within the political parties and the political entities within Venezuela. So controlling Caracas, controlling the oil infrastructure, being able to provide a certain level of security to where people feel safe, where people have some confidence in the government's ability to perform legitimate functions of government and provide those services, while at the same time providing an environment where people are convinced that they can go back to Venezuela. Venezuela has one of the biggest diasporas in the world right now. They can reinvest. You want to see big private sector growth, increased access to goods and services. All that's possible, but we're just going to have to understand that the cartels are going to be competing for that. Drugs, unfortunately, are incredibly profitable. And so there's always going to be this element, especially within the more defensible, harder to get to areas of Venezuela, where they can set up shop, continue to manufacture and distribute drugs. And that's going to be the question is, will they be able to manufacture and sell drugs, and will they have enough people to actually destabilize? Will the anti-Maduro parties be able to remain reasonably unified, or will you see factions there as they compete? And then the other big question, this is the one we need to understand, is that smart rebels that are fighting the United States understand that you don't beat the United States by confronting the United States military. We will jack your ass up. They beat the United States by basically being very, very clever in the sort of operations that they conduct, roadside bombs, drone attacks, things of that nature. Because if they can rack up U.S. casualties, if they can influence the American public in order to influence the next election cycle, that's how you eventually get the United States out. But again, there's a good case scenario here where Venezuela is a strategic ally. Russia and China are kicked out. Cuba is the Cuban regime, which is very, very dependent upon Venezuela right now, is entirely destabilized. We've seen very, very positive developments in South America with respect to Argentina and Chile and the recent elections they've had. So again, this could be the start of something great, but there is a worst case scenario that I think we need to be careful about as well.
Nick Freitas with us. Nick, former Green Beret, Special Forces. Nick, also former House of Delegates member in Virginia, Republican, and has his own podcast now. Nick, let's get to oil, right? A lot of Republicans are shying away from oil, saying, "Oh, this is about justice, about it. We have somebody that we have to bring to justice. It's about law." That's nonsense. Okay, that's just nonsense. This was about oil. This was about getting our oil back. Our U.S. companies invested billions and billions of dollars there, and it got taken over when it got nationalized. How does oil flowing out of Venezuela to the United States, how does that benefit Middle America? Because that's all I'm interested in now. Somebody that our affordability, bringing gas prices down. I'm not interested in the big oil companies and the elites. How does this benefit average Americans? Cost of goods sold, gas going down to $1.50. How does this work?
Sure. Well, Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world. That doesn't mean they're necessarily the cheapest to get to, but they're the largest known reserves. And so whenever you can, if you can add Venezuela up there operating at capacity, it does a couple of things. One, it brings the global price per barrel down theoretically significantly, so you can get gas prices down. There's a certain target number they like to hit in order to provide stability, but it actually gives the United States far more control over that, and we're less dependent upon petrodollars in the Middle East affecting the global price. That doesn't mean it stops affecting the global price. It just means that now there's another lever that can be pushed to where if various OPEC countries in the Middle East decided that they wanted to cut off supply in order to raise prices, well, now there's another mechanism whereby oil can enter the market that isn't necessarily under their control. So that's beneficial for the world market. It's beneficial for the United States, and it's beneficial for United States consumers because, again, it creates less dependency. Again, we don't get the majority of our oil from the Middle East, but it still impacts the price on the global market.
Right.
And so that's very important. It's also important to understand what oil from Venezuela coming out and being used by China, Russia, Cuba, et cetera, what that does. So first of all, it provides an additional supply. It's not an ideal one for Russia and China because they got to go so far to get it, but it's there. And then for Cuba, it was absolutely essential. And then when you look at the way the money was used in order to fuel corruption, it was essential to not only propping up a socialist dictatorship in Venezuela, but provided them funds for a long time in order to fund it in other areas as well. And so across the board, it's good for us economically. It's also good when we look at our strategic concerns. The only thing I would push back on there, John, is I don't think it's an either or proposition. I don't think we should shy away from oil. I think when anybody says, "Oh, I can't believe we're going to conflict over oil," it's like, "Oh yeah, you mean the most vital resource in a modern economy?" Like, shut up. Right. The same people that are screaming about how much, we shouldn't be dependent upon oil are the one who basically petroleum products are essential to almost every aspect of their lives. So can it, right?
Right.
Let's be big boys. Let's be adults here and have a rational conversation. I don't think the United States should be going around invading anywhere that happens to have oil. But when we have a variety of national strategic incentives and interests, which all align, that creates a lot more justification for why this is something that actually is in American interest. We just need to be very, very careful on what happens on the next phase.
Makes sense, Nick. Freitas with us. Let me ask you this question. Are we going to be able to cut off the supply of oil to China, Russia, and Cuba? How do we do that?
Well, there's a reason why. If you look at where one of the areas where China is really focused right now, it's Malaysia. And one of the reasons why is because they want to be able to do a pipeline from China into Malaysia to their ports so that they can actually get Middle Eastern oil without having to go through the Malacca Straits. The Malacca Straits is one of the three most important waterways in the world. You've got the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, and Malacca Straits. I think it's like almost over 1/3 of all trade goes through the Malacca Straits. And the Chinese government knows that if the United States Navy wanted to shut that down, that they could essentially cripple China's ability to get the amounts of oil it would require to fuel its economy and its military. So they're focused a lot right now on the conflict in Malaysia. They're not really getting involved in the civil war. They just essentially want to maintain a status quo to where they can build their pipeline. None of the rebel groups touch it. The Malaysian government doesn't touch it, and China can get their oil. So that's one of the big areas that they're looking at. Russia obviously has huge natural gas reserves. Massive amounts of natural resources. Some of them are in easier places to get it than others. But it's also interesting because China and Russia are not necessarily natural allies. They're kind of allies of convenience at this point. I think one of the things that Trump's been trying to do with respect to the war in the Ukraine is he's been trying to stop it, but he's also been trying to stop it in a way where potentially we can pull away this not necessarily natural alliance between Russia, China, Iran, et cetera. So obviously, being able to have good, stable relations in the Middle East, being able to isolate Iran, driving a wedge between China and Russia, and then cutting off, being able to apply military force when necessary, should it become necessary. These are the various ways that we would prevent China from being able to have the access to the oil resources they need should they get more aggressive in their foreign policy.
Nick Freitas with us here on the John Fredericks Media Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. Nick, I'm going to switch to local politics. Virginia, complete and utter catastrophe in 2025. I mean, you couldn't have predicted that we'd get Jay Jones beating Jason Miyares by 6 points, basically, a guy that wanted to assassinate the speaker, his family, his kids. It's unbelievable what has gone on there. There was a generational victory for them. The communists now in Virginia control the House, the Senate, the governorship. You saw the person that Spanberger appointed as DEI head. She basically called
Mhm.
for the dissolution of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, this is incredible. And now there's a race for party chairman. I know you were a Cameron Hamilton fan back in the day. He's one of the candidates. Is there any future for the beleaguered so-called Republican Party of Virginia? Which
There is, but
in and of
to go
itself
back
is an
to go back
oxymoron, but go ahead.
No, going back to my special forces days, this is where I tell people that there's a reason why we use military terminology when we talk about politics, right? Campaign, targeting districts, et cetera. What Republicans of Virginia need to understand now is we're the insurgents. We have lost so significantly in the House. The Senate may look close, but when you look at the lines, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine us taking back the Senate without some significant work on the ground. Now, all of that is possible, but the RPV is going to have to be completely reorganized. I think we have an RPV right now where we've got some serious problems with the way it's run, the way it's organized, the way it fundraises, and a lot of that is structural. And if that doesn't get changed, I don't see it being a credible force within Virginia politics for the foreseeable future. Now, that can all be done. It's a question of whether or not people on the state central committee are going to be willing to kind of give up some of the control that they have in order to make it a leaner, more
Nick,
operational.
That'll never happen.
I know that you asked me what I thought was needed.
Look,
John, you asked me what I thought was needed. I'm telling you.
I mean,
the other thing
it's never going to happen because they're not going to give up their little fiefdoms. They got 80 little fiefdoms and they're controlling these little segments, and that's their power base. That's their, that's what they put on their business card. I mean, that's their power base.
Mhm.
They're never going to give that up. And the way this thing is set up is a catastrophe. Like, you can never win with the way this thing is set up, Nick, ever.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that unless the Republican Party understands that they can't just be a debating society, they have to actually be an operational unit that has relevance throughout the Commonwealth instead of just getting together in the little meetings and fighting with one another, like, until they understand that. Now, every once in a while, John, you have something like this that's so catastrophic that allows for somebody to come in and make significant changes. But if they don't, we're going to continue to hit a wall. The other thing I think we need to understand is that I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't think Abigail Spanberger is running anything. I think Don Scott and Louise Lucas, and to some degree Adam Surville or Scott Surville are leading the Commonwealth. And the reason why that is far more dangerous than Abigail Spanberger is Spanberger just kind of does this go with the flow because she's always looking to the next thing she's going to run for. But when you look at like a Don Scott, say what you want about Don Scott, he's intelligent, and he's going to run this thing a lot more like the mob. I promise you, every major industry in Virginia that has given donations to Republicans has gotten a call from their lobbyists telling them, you had better drop a huge check to Don Scott, Louise Lucas, and Abigail Spanberger right the hell now, because they will use the activist wing of the Democratic Party to threaten Republican industry and donors. They will use the activist wing to threaten them with, we're going to get rid of right to work. We're going to raise your taxes. We're going to drastically increase the minimum wage. We're going to do all the stuff that the activists want. And then it'll be Don and Louise who pick up the phone, call these industries and say, hey, look, you can either be at the table when we have these conversations and maybe you get a special little carve out for your industry, or you can just get raked over the coals like everybody else. Because the activists, the true believers in the Democratic Party, and there's several in the House and Senate, these guys are not bright enough to understand that they're about to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Socialism doesn't work, newsflash, right? Don's smart enough to understand that you can fleece them up to a particular point, but he wants to consolidate power at this point. And so the message has been sent out far and wide that you better mind your P's and Q's or else really, really bad legislation is coming. And it'll be interesting to see what they do this first year, because we've got midterms coming up. They want to rally their base. They want to consolidate power. But then Don's smart enough to make sure that they're a little bit more careful next year when it's a different election cycle, because he doesn't want to lose control of the House. And honestly, with the massive pickups that they had, it's going to be difficult to take it back for a while. I think, unfortunately, we're going to be feeling a lot of pain, economically especially, but also with respect to our gun rights. For those of us that care about innocent human life in the womb, it's about to get really bad there as well. And with those of us who are concerned about the indoctrination of our children in schools, well, buckle up, because it's happening. So now would be a great time to try to find alternatives, because They're coming after that environment. They understand how critical it is to their future. We asked, how in the hell can a communist Islamist get elected in New York City? Well, when you have an education system that is constantly telling your kids America bad, America evil, don't be surprised when they grow up to be the sort of people that vote for candidates like Mamdani. And unfortunately, we're going to see a similar push here in Virginia. So that's my honest assessment of where we're at and what we need to do. We need to get a lot more organized at the grassroots level. And we also need to understand that our role at this point is not to play nice with the Democrats. Okay, they are trying to literally take over the state, turn it to a 10-1 state when it comes to our congressional representation. Republicans in Virginia need to, if there's one message I want Republicans in Virginia to understand, it's this: the Virginia way is dead. We're not the ones that killed it. The Democrats did. So stop acting like you can nice your way to victory again and start actually fighting.
Do you have a candidate in the RPV race, chairman's race?
I haven't come out and publicly endorsed anyone. I will say that I have a great deal of faith in Cameron Hamilton. I think he's highly intelligent and definitely a man of integrity. The thing that I will tell anybody running for chairman is, if you are not willing to actually make the fight for significant structural change, I don't see the RPV being a force in Virginia politics. And the problem is that if you're the sort of chairman that's going to try to make that structural change, you're going to make enemies really, really quick. And so it is going to take someone of a great deal of intelligence, integrity, but also political skill to pull that off. But look, again, Cameron Hamilton, I think, is one of the finest men I know in Virginia politics, and I want him to have a future in Virginia politics. So we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Nick Freitas, final thing: 10-1. This redistricting is going to pass again in January. Then it's going to go on the ballot. I don't see any way for us to defeat this. We don't have the infrastructure or the money. It's going to pass probably 65-35. I don't see any way to beat this on the ballot. They have the ground game, the early balloting, the mail-in vote. They just got it all. We got nothing. So we're going to get trounced. Do you see this getting defeated or put off by the Virginia Supreme Court, or are we going to have a 10-1 map going into the midterms?
I don't know about 10-1. I know that's what they're shooting for, but I honestly think they're saying 10-1 right now, so they can give us probably something that's more like 9-2 and say that they compromised. I would love it if the Virginia Supreme Court would stand up and say, look, this was done as about as unconstitutionally as it could have been. But I think that this court is probably going to give deference based off of the last election results. And I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's an appropriate way to make decisions within the court. I hope what they do is they look at it and they say, look, an election was already underway. Because let's face it, it was the Democrats that said, hey, we want 45-day election cycles. Okay, well, you had a bunch of people that had already voted in Virginia by the time you started to pull this off. And so how does that not violate? How does that not violate the rules which say that the clerk of the court is supposed to notify people about constitutional amendments within a certain time period? I think the law is fairly clear in a couple different ways. The Democrats violated the Constitution, but it all comes down to whether or not the Supreme Court of Virginia wants to apply the letter of the law, if they want to be originalists, or if they want to look at this, well, the Democrats won so overwhelmingly clearly there's not a popular backlash against this. If that's the way they want to interpret it, that's another possible way. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm certainly not saying this in any way as an insult to the Virginia Supreme Court. But we've seen courts do this before, where instead of interpreting the law as it's written, they give additional deference based off of the vibes of the last election cycle. And that's not how the court is supposed to operate. Mm-hmm. But it has been a powerful motivator, especially among more liberal justices.
People want to follow you and your podcast. Where do they go, Nick?
You just go to Nick J. Freitas, pretty much anywhere on social media, or YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And then the name of the podcast is Making the Argument. And we have another show called The Y Minutes for those who only like 4 to 5 minute snippets.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the new podcast. I've seen it. It's outstanding. You're on the John Fredericks Media Network. John McGuire next.